Okay, welcome to the show, everyone. Leah and I are so excited. We have Cyndi Darnell with us. Cyndi is a sex therapist, and I'm gonna be honest with you, Cyndi. Leah and I have been really nervous for this episode.
Oh,
We're nervous and excited. I think sex is a very taboo thing to talk about. And for me, and I think for Leah, but I don't want to speak for you, but for me personally, growing up, no one ever talked to me about sex. I mean, I never, my mom never talked to me when I, you know, got my menstrual cycle or, if I was dating somebody or I never had that birds and the bees talk. It was almost this very taboo thing to talk about. So I feel like a little uncomfortable talking about it now, but I'm excited to like sit with this discomfort and learn today.
excellent. Then you're on the right track.
So, can you let our listeners know a little bit about what you do in this space and the services that you offer and how
Mm,
you got into this in the first place?
mm, So I'm originally from Australia. You can probably tell from my
Yeah.
accent, and so a lot of my historic drug taking shenanigans happened in Australia. Um, so there's that little piece of the context. But I started out originally in Australia. I was trained as a psychotherapist, and I was just a run of the mill psychotherapist. Um, but what I noticed was even among psychotherapists and in our training at that time, and I think this is still true for a lot of places now, not just in Australia, but around the English speaking world, let's say, when you train to be a psychotherapist, you don't talk about sex, which is fascinating to me.
Yeah.
And it's again for me that it sort of set up this lifelong quest that I've always been interested in what people are not saying. It's that absence of direct access that I'm always like the bee to the honey on that, just like what's not being said here. And because with psychotherapy, it's all about my feelings and my inner world and my childhood and my attachment and my this and my that and my blah 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 blah. All of that matters, absolutely, it
Sure.
matters. But when we don't also include sex, to me, there is this glaring omission of this fundamental aspect of the human condition, whether we have sex or we've decided that we're never going to have sex again with ourselves or with anybody else, that sex is not for me, which I respect that position for people who've come to that decision. But when we come to that decision from a place of ignorance, because we haven't done any self inquiry, because we haven't been able to sit with and tolerate the feelings, the thoughts, the sensations that emerge for us when we engage with the topic of sexuality, and we just decide that we're going to go la 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 la, no 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 no, too hard too hard too hard, we end up living a truncated life, because this aspect of what we are, not who we are, but this aspect of what we are as sexual beings, as living breathing erotic beings, is only accessible to us if we choose to engage with it. This is true for people who identify as asexual, through to people who identify as, slutty McSlutface. It doesn't matter. You still have the, I think, ethical responsibility as a human to dig into knowing yourself, and you have your whole life to do it. It's not like we've got 5 minutes, let's go. We've got our entire lifetimes to do this. But if we just omit this one crucial piece of who we are, our sexuality, um to me it just speaks volumes again about this deafening silence of what's not being said. So how I got into this was because I was perpetually fascinated at how these so-called uh you know people who were into feeling everything but not sex could do their work. And I used to think, well, what are you going to do if a client comes to you and wants to talk about their sex life and you can't handle it? You're just going to shut down? because then you're of no use to the client either. So anyway, over time, I sort of talked with my therapy colleagues and stuff about it at the time. And increasingly, it just became a thing that people were like, I don't want to deal. I'm not interested in, I don't want to talk about it. I want to specialize in depression and anxiety, or I want to specialize in personality disorders, or I want to specialize in attachment and family of origin stuff, like whatever. And a lot of therapists will have their specialty thing that they are into, and that's cool. Like, I'm not bagging folks out for that. However, when human sexuality is not considered part of holistic counseling or holistic therapy or holistic coaching or whatever you want to call it, if sex is seen as this secret other that has to go in this dark box under the bed, that is indicative of our society's profound discomfort to deal with something that is an incredibly important part of who we are. And because I was, there was a period of time where I was fascinated by sex just because I thought it was interesting. I still think it's interesting, obviously, but I'm at a point in my life where I've done a lot of things and I've been around the block multiple times, multiple blocks in multiple hemispheres now even. And I'm like, I don't feel that I don't have anything to prove anymore. Like, I'm kind of pretty content with me and who I am and where I've been and where I'm going. And I'm like, I'm sort of done, So it's not, I don't have this agenda of, I need to do this thing with that person in this way. So now my work is less focused on that carnal sort of, how can I have the best sex ever? I've probably done that. Now my work is more focused on how can I help people move closer toward the things they feel they cannot say. Ooh. That to me is very, very interesting. And for a lot of people, sex is the house where that stuff tends to live. Sex sometimes is about sex problems, but sex is also sometimes the place where our unresolved emotions go to get processed. And they will manifest in sex, but in their origin, the origin is not from sex, which is a really interesting thing for a lot of folks. So now in the US, I work as a consultant, as a coach. So I work across state lines. I don't have the restriction of an American trained therapist. And technically, I tend to not call my work psychotherapy anymore for that reason, just from a legislative point of view. But my background is in psychotherapy, and now I work consulting with folks around sex and relationships, particularly around the things that people feel afraid to say. That's really my jam.
Wow.
I know. I'm going to maybe talk a little bit about my past to get to where I am now, because this is very interesting to me, the topic of sex. And Christine and I did like a somatic healing women's circle a few weeks ago, where it was just like moving and dancing. And there was a part in it where there was like this sexual song on. And I felt so uncomfortable doing these moves because I have always considered myself a not so sexual person. Mm-hmm. And I've always said that I'm just not that sexual. And I think about the way I grew up, and it was similar to Christine. Like, my mom didn't talk to me about sex. They were very, very Christian. Like, we just don't talk about it, and you don't have it until you're married. And there was a lot of shame, which is kind of ironic because my dad was a sex addict and had to go to rehab for sex. But I think that also played into the reason why we didn't talk about it ever.
Absolutely.
So
what a perfect storm.
Yeah, literally. So when I met my husband, I joke around, but I think that there's maybe a little bit of truth to it. He was a playboy and he never settled down, and he slept with a lot of females, and then he met me and I'm like, I'm not sleeping with you. Like, that's not happening. Like, I don't do that. And you're going to have to work for it. And I swear to God, we've been together 17 years. And I joke that that's why, because I made him work for, for that. But it was so uncomfortable, like leading up to that. And it's been an issue for the better part of our marriage that I'm just like, I'm just not that sexual. I'm just not. Now, I want to say, since working with psychedelics in the last 2.5 years, we've experimented with MDMA together. That's opened me up a lot. Also, I think the biggest part for me is I have been more connected with myself. And that's huge, because I think for a very long time I was disconnected from even who I was and what I enjoyed. So, I think that becoming comfortable with myself has allowed me to be more comfortable with sex and with intimacy. And it's not so taboo anymore. But I also want to say, I know I'm going on a little tangent here, but this is important. I used to say, like, I can't orgasm. Like, it just doesn't happen. It's very rare. And now it happens like almost every time, multiple times. Because I think that did you know that?
No, I didn't. I'm learning.
You're learning about me right now too. Like, I think that this all plays a huge part in it, is like being more comfortable and vulnerable with myself, and in turn being more comfortable and vulnerable with him, and having like a safe outlet and a safe place to explore and to experiment. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, what we know about orgasm in particular, right, is, I mean, there are two parts to this. First of all, sex that ends in orgasm is not necessarily successful sex. So I'll just put a pin in that and we'll come back to it.
Okay.
The other part about orgasm is that in order for an orgasm to happen, you need to have a nervous system that is relaxed enough to be able to produce an orgasm. But unlike sleeping, where you're, sleeping, right? You know what sleeping is, where your nervous system is relaxed. If you're that relaxed, obviously, you're not capable of kind of having energy. So what's unusual about sex, and what's particularly unusual about orgasm, is it requires a level of relaxation that most of us will only ever experience during sleep, but we also need to have it simultaneously with a level of arousal that most of us will only ever experience when we're anxious, or when we're running, or when we're excited and adrenalized. It is a very unusual combination of factors that our nervous system is processing in that tiny 3 or 4 second moment, where there's enough relaxation coupled with enough stimulation, and that we can tolerate both of those things at the same time without our little heads exploding. That's what produces an orgasm, and that all of that happens within the nervous system and in the brain, which is fascinating, because most of us tend to think that orgasm happens in the genitals, and it can, but it's like a sneeze, the genital sneeze, right? Nobody gives you a cookie for sneezing. It's like, good on you, you sneezed, well done. Maybe when you're a toddler or something, you get a cookie for sneezing, but as an adult, it'd be like, why are you, congratulating me for sneezing? Whereas when we have an orgasm, it's kind of like, yeah, because of this social cultural narrative around orgasm is the apex of sex. So let me come back to this. For some people, orgasm is an achievement, especially if you've struggled to have them, they have been unreliable, they've been elusive, whatever. And then there are other people who just have them willy-nilly all the time, and it's kind of, just another Tuesday. It's no big deal. The degree to which we focus, and I mean we like a society that focus on orgasm as the marker of successful sex, is based less on our capacity to inquire about the quality of sex we're having, and instead narrowing our experience of the erotic down to this thing where we can say, all right, I had an orgasm, check, therefore the sex must have been good. As opposed to sex that was profoundly intimate, incredibly sensual, engaging so many parts of our body that we can hold on to and remember for months, years back. When we think about the most memorable sex we've had, often, not always, but often, it has nothing to do with whether or not we had an orgasm, and everything to do with the place we went within ourselves in that moment. That's what makes it memorable. The orgasm itself, it's the sneeze. Like, it's fine. Who doesn't like them? They're good enough. But are they memorable? Maybe for some people who have struggled and they have their very first orgasm, yes, that's memorable. But subsequent orgasms after that, eh, you know. The first one is significant because it means something to you. It tells you you met yourself in a place that you had never met yourself before. That's memorable. But every subsequent orgasm after that, it's all right. It's fine.
I never thought
But if
about
that
it.
is not why you're there, if that's not why you're having sex to have an orgasm, which for a lot of people, that's not why they have sex. And then they leave the sex thing, the experience feeling a bit meh, a bit empty. And they're like, I don't understand it. I had an orgasm, but why am I not that into it? Because it's actually not what's motivating you. But because we've been tricked into and truncated into thinking good sex is measured by how many orgasms you have, if you are one of those people for whom orgasm is not that interesting, it's not that motivating, you are not a weirdo. We are way more textured than that sexually. And orgasm is just one aspect of sex. There's so many others.
Yeah, for me, it's about connection, connecting with my partner, and like
Right.
having
And
that.
it can be about connecting with our partners too.
Yeah,
But also, if we are not connected to
right.
ourselves, it's very, very hard to connect with another person.
Yeah,
And if the connection is based on achieving a particular outcome, so for a lot of men, a lot of straight men, they will be very focused on whether or not their wives and girlfriends have orgasms. Right?
yes, I was gonna say that. Yeah.
Right? That, and no disrespect to the fellas listening, it is not about them actually being invested in whether or not you're having a good time. It is about validation of their prowess as a lover. If you come, then I'm good in bed. It's about my connection to myself. Now, if she says, what I would really like is for you to, go down on me and do this and do that, and then fuck me with that dildo and use that vibrator on me, and then, suck my toes and, give me a massage and then make me roast beef. That to me is going to be memorable sex. And he's like, but what about the orgasm? And you're like, meh, that's not memorable for me. And then he's like, no, I don't want to do all of that for you. The investment is not actually in your pleasure. If the investment is only in validating him, so saying, well, I'm going to have an orgasm because that makes you feel good, then you're left just feeling like a performing seal in a circus. Look, I can balance a ball on my nose. For him, to validate him, then you're still, even though you're having the orgasm, if it's not your motivator, if it's not really why you're there, sex is still going to feel empty. So let's not confuse orgasms with good quality sex. They can be the same thing, but for a lot of people, they are not the same thing. And this is an okay conversation to have.
Wow, you're already blowing my mind.
Like you said earlier, there's like so much pressure. Well, we were talking before we had you on about the amount of sex that's like normal. And I hate those quizzes. I hate those questions because it just kind of like compares you to other people, and it has nothing to do with the quality of sex. It's just the amount.
That's right.
And for a long time, I felt like sex was this thing that had to be performed.
Yeah. And a lot of people feel like that across genders.
Yeah.
Women feel that sex is a performance. Men absolutely feel that sex is a performance. So much so that when men inquire to work with me, there's an application form on my website that folks fill in to work with me. And I would say 95% of the men who work with me on their own, they will, in the application, they will use the word performance. I have performance issues. I can't perform.
Wow.
Perform. For men, this conditioning around sex is so incredibly performance oriented that it fucks them up so much because, where I was saying before about women feeling like seals in a circus balancing a ball on their nose, men also experience that in different ways, but that's often where this quest for validation's coming from. Like, I have to have an orgasm, I have to have an erection, you have to have an orgasm, because god damn it, sex for men is only about performance. Let your guard down, be vulnerable, approach sex with a soft dick. Are you kidding me? What am I going to do with a soft dick? Everything in society that has said to men, sex is about you being the leader, being dominant, being hard, being the aggressor, being the initiator, being the one who has it all together. Don't show vulnerability. Be a man, but be sensitive.
That's a lot of pressure.
It is a lot of
That's,
pressure.
and then men will be like, it's easier for me to just sit in front of the computer and masturbate because then I don't have to deal with this pressure. And I get it. Is it a solution? Ultimately, no, it's not a long-term solution. As a short-term intervention, just to buy you some time, I understand why that happens to a lot of fellas. And then we get into this whole no fap blah blah thing, which I think is just compounding the problem. Like, there's nothing wrong with fapping, there's nothing wrong with watching porn, there's nothing wrong with doing any of the things that any of us do. The issue is when we sit in silence, and that's why I always come back to this. It's the things that we cannot say that fuck us up the most.
Wow. And I feel like both male and female, like it's hard for them to communicate exactly what you're just saying right now.
That's right. That's right. And that's where having guidance, from somebody who is competent in discussing these things, whether they're a therapist or a coach or a counselor or whatever like title they use, someone who is competent in talking about this stuff is a really handy resource. And it's not to say that if you reach out to a sex therapist or whoever, that it's because you're crazy or you're damaged or you're, you're a pervert or anything like that. It's because all of us need an opportunity to be able to talk about sex in ways that are significant, in ways that are meaningful. And if we don't have that outlet, and we only spend time talking about sex with people who have been conditioned with the same lies that we have been conditioned by, it's very easy to jump to conclusions based on stuff that we imagine.
Yeah.
In contrast with stuff that's actually clinically shown to be true, such as, orgasm is not necessarily a marker of quality sex. How often you're having sex is not a marker of a healthy relationship. Healthy relationships are measured in so many different ways, including the degree to which you feel content in each other's company and how you treat each other, the reverence with which you hold the gift that is your relationship. It is not measured by how many orgasms you have and how many times you have sex a week. That's one way of measuring it, I guess. But ultimately, if it leaves you feeling unfulfilled, it's not you that's the problem. It's the scale that's the problem.
Yeah. I was going to say that doesn't feel very fulfilling. It just feels like checking boxes off. And
Exactly.
I hate that. There aren't enough of you. I feel like there was a point in our relationship before my husband got sober where, we knew we had sex issues, and because in his opinion, we weren't having enough of it. But in my opinion, I didn't feel connected enough to have more sex. So it was this like pulling of my needs versus his needs and having a hard time meeting in the middle. So I remember like looking for, maybe we should go to like some sex retreat or see a sex therapist. And there wasn't really a lot out there. This was years ago, locally at all. Like, and I think he kind of thought that it was weird that I would have been looking for someone outside of our relationship to help with something on the inside of our relationship. I will say since then, there has been a lot of connection made since he's been sober that I'm like, that's what was missing. It was
Yeah.
the connection to ourselves and the connection with each other. And
Right.
when, we still have 3 kids, we still have a life, we're still very busy. The sex doesn't happen as often as either of us would like, but the quality of it is so much better than I could have ever imagined that we're both okay with that. Like,
Yeah.
it's not a box to check anymore.
That's right. And I think that that's a much more sustainable place to come from in a long-term relationship is, checking in with yourselves about, is the quality of the sex you're having meaningful to you on a scale that you've decided is relevant. So when we mistake orgasms and frequency for good sex, we are just following the social script about, well, this is what I think sex is supposed to be. Or, when I hang out with my friends, we talk about how many times a week we do it, or how many orgasms we have, or if we get into freaky stuff or that kind of thing. It's always about this kind of sense of escalation and sense of performance. There's very little, no one ever rewards you for having this profound internal experience of stillness, or a profound internal experience of meeting yourself in a way that you've never done before. You can't put that on Instagram as a photo.
No.
So
Right.
there's not often, it's like there's nobody there to celebrate the victory with you, because it just happened within yourself,
Right.
and you can tell people about it. But it's something that's, even though that, again, that thing about connection, that we have sex to connect with each other, like, yes, absolutely, that's part of it. But more than anything, I'm quite certain from all the years I've been doing this work that when people have partnered sex, it's because they are better able to reach a part of themselves that they cannot reach when they're by themselves.
Wow. I feel like the work you do is kind of psychedelic a little bit.
Yeah.
It is a bit trippy, isn't it?
Yeah.
But sex can also create these altered states of consciousness for us.
Yeah.
If you spend an afternoon, running into the evening, having a sex marathon, right? Where you're there for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 hours. And I don't mean doing intercourse for 10 hours.
Yeah.
That would be exhausting and painful. But I mean, just riding those waves of connection to yourself and to each other. And whether that's making out, whether that's doing hand stuff, whether that is, pausing to have a little bit of water and, get a bit of blood sugar happening, have a little cookie and just be like, oh, all right, I gotta. But to have a session where you're just riding these waves, taking turns, doing oral on each other, whatever it is. Very few people will talk about that time I had a 10-hour sex marathon, because it doesn't occur to them that could get them as high as a session on Molly, or a session on ketamine, or a session on whatever. Because most of us think about sex as being this thing that happens in a short, quick, truncated, fast fashion, and it ends with an orgasm, probably his, maybe yours, and then it's over. And once the sneeze has happened, that's it, we're done. That, you can have that sneeze effect in 15 minutes if you want, 5 minutes for some people. Whoop-de-doo. Like, so, that's not to say that kind of sex is not valuable. It can be. But because we're talking about the psychedelic aspect of sex, that takes time for the mind, the nervous system, the body, the brain, the whole thing to start syncing up together, given that we spend the vast majority of our day disconnected, disembodied. I would sometimes say dissociated. A lot of us spend a lot of our time just completely dissociated. We don't know what we're feeling in any given moment. Having a 10-hour sex marathon, gives your mind, body, heart, spirit, genitals, whatever you want to call it, 10 hours to start to come into some kind of cohesion again. You can get really fucking high, really high on breath, massage, eye gazing, and just, being in the essence of another person's erotic energy. That in itself can be incredibly profound, and you don't even have to take your clothes off. You can get that high if you know the techniques to do. I teach this to folks in weekend retreats. That's sort of one of my more elite services. It's not what I would do in my regular weekly sessions. But there are folks who hire me for a weekend where I teach them how to do that stuff. And they're amazed at how not sleazy it is. Because it's like, I didn't know the sex could feel like this. And I didn't even have to take my clothes off. Or, the bits that I teach them where they're clothed, and then I give them the hyper version of it that they will do for homework when their clothes are off. But they are just like, I did not know sex could feel like this. This is what I've been missing. And it's the same thing that people who've had, ketamine experiences or acid experiences or Molly experiences have this, they're like, I didn't know that I was capable of this much love or insight or affection or whatever it is that they come to. We have access to that through sex if we want it. But most of us don't even go near sex for long enough to allow that part of ourselves to awaken. Most of us, the sex will be over in 30 minutes. And unfortunately, that's not long enough to get to that kind of high.
Wow. What is the pleasure receptor? Is that like dopamine or is that oxytocin?
Well, there's a new study that came out. Well, it's a new old study that came out, I think just this week. I think, was it in the Atlantic or the Washington Post? There was a big article just this week about oxytocin. Now that they've discovered oxytocin is probably not the bonding hormone they thought it was.
Oh.
Yeah. And dopamine never was a bonding hormone. The function of dopamine is an incentive. It's a motivator. So I think where pop culture has got these things a little bit skewed is that historically in pop culture, we were told that the dopamine was about rewards and pleasure. What we know from neuroscience now is that dopamine is an incentive neurotransmitter. It encourages us to chase after a thing, but once we have the thing, the dopamine is no longer motivating us at that point. That's what they used to say, that oxytocin was that thing, that from an orgasm or from connection that we would experience an oxytocin rush, which may still be true. But what they have discovered is that what they thought that oxytocin was responsible for pair bonding, they're now realizing is not true from the studies that they did, the research that came out just the other week, that they determined the pair bonding still happened because they had some little critters, voles, mice, moles, some little animal that they researched on, and they inhibited the oxytocin production and they were still able to pair bond without it.
Wow.
That was the research. So looking at the high of sex through a dopamine / oxytocin lens is not comprehensive enough.
Okay.
But a very good question, and I'm glad you asked it.
You wrote a book.
I was just going to ask that.
I was like, we have to kind of get into this. Sex when you don't feel like it. And when Christine mentioned this to me, like I'm going to admit that like I was just like, well, if I don't feel like it, I'm just not going to do it. Like it's just that simple. But I didn't think about it through the lens of like, a lot of times we don't feel like it because there's something off with our libido, or we don't have a sex drive, or what you were saying earlier, we're so disconnected from ourselves that I have a million things that I'm trying to think of doing. I have a million things on my plate and I can't get in the mood because there's too much stuff in the way.
Or a lot of
Exactly.
times okay, like just do it, get it over and
Get it
done
over
with.
with. Yeah, like
Yeah,
that's where it feels like very transactional, but there's not a lot of transaction happening. It's just like
that's right.
Yeah.
one sided. So, without giving too much away of the book, like, can you get into that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote the book Sex When You Don't Feel Like It because the number one reason that couples seek out somebody like me is because of mismatched libido. It's very, 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 very common for couples to have mismatched libido. In fact, I would say that 100% of couples have mismatched libido, and that is, pardon me, nothing to be worried about. It's something to be addressed. It's something that you need to pay attention to, but it's not an indication that the relationship isn't working, or it's not an indication that there's a major compatibility problem. It does mean, though, that you need to develop the skills to be able to understand what is happening to yourself at an individual level. And this is responsible for both partners to be able to understand for themselves what's happening. And then to be able to discuss it together so you can come up with some sort of a plan about how you're going to manage this. Because, spoiler alert, there is no way to make you both want the same thing at the same time, in the same way, for the same duration, in the same, universe every single time.
Yeah.
There are going to be moments where you can fluke that and it feels kind of effortless and it feels magical and it feels, those sorts of experiences tend to be what people will describe as the most memorable erotic experiences of their lives, where they got out of their own way long enough to be able to enjoy what was happening. But for the vast majority of us, because we spend 99% of our lives disembodied, disconnected, dissociated, expecting that we're just going to crawl into bed at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday night and be immediately catapulted into this, exotic, erotic fantasy, is utterly ludicrous. And it's based on the fact that we don't talk about sex in ways that are meaningful. Again, it's what's not said. We're left with this narrative of either porn, which, how that ends, and then on the other side of it is the rom-coms and the Disney and the Pixar films, where it's all about
Mm.
the romance and the feelings, but so saccharine sweet that it's, again, impossible to construct a relationship that mimics the life of a Disney princess. And so when people say, oh, well, porn is ruining sex for people, I would say no, actually. If anything, it's the combination of the lack of sex education, the hysteria around porn, and then the fact that we don't even get relationships education. Most of us get our relationships education from Disney, Pixar, and rom-coms.
Mm-hmm.
And then we squish it all together and we think, well, why doesn't my life look like this? Why doesn't my life look like, you know? And so Sex When You Don't Feel Like It was born from hundreds, thousands of conversations I had with couples who experienced mismatched libido, and then individuals who will say, every time I get into a relationship, I don't want to have sex anymore. I'm cool, for the first 6 months. And then we start getting serious and then I lose interest.
Mm.
It's for those people to learn how to start having a conversation, at least with yourself, about why sex matters to you, if indeed it does. I'm also very much an advocate for people who have come to a complete decision in their lives to say, sex no longer matters to me. It's not important to me. I've looked at it this way, that way, upside down, inside out. I've tried this thing, that thing, done all the things, and I have absolutely come to the very informed, peaceful decision that sex is not something I'm going to dedicate any more time to. And I would say, great, good on you. That's a wonderful thing to have decided. Put that to sleep, get on with the rest of your life. But then there are people who, when they hear me say that, they feel a sense of sadness inside themselves because they think, I'm a person who's given up sex, but it wasn't because I had done the inquiry. I gave it up because I felt resigned to it. I gave it up because I felt like nobody really cared what I wanted. I gave it up because I felt so ashamed of asking myself these questions. It was too hard. So I just put it all in the box under my bed, and I haven't pulled it out for the last 15 years. I don't even know what's under there. It's so buried now. So many people live in a world of shame, pain, silence, distress about sex because they don't give themselves permission to talk about it. They don't even know how to start talking about it. And that's where the book is really a guide on how to, not only how to ask yourself the questions you need to ask yourself, but then I actually give you the questions. And I'm like, think about this, write about this, really ponder this, maybe talk to your friends about it. If talking to your partner about it feels too vulnerable, which for a lot of people it does, talk to your best friend about it. And like, you don't have to be, the person you're discussing sex with is not a person you have to be having sex with necessarily. You can just talk about it like we're talking about it. And it also, interestingly, the more you talk about sex, the less hot it is. Like, this is not an especially hot conversation,
Right.
but it's an incredibly profound conversation, and it's a very intimate conversation. But I'm not feeling especially turned on by it, which is, again, I think one of the things that people think is really interesting. But if I talk about sex, what happens if I get turned on? And I'm like, if you talk about sex in the way I teach you to, I guarantee you're not going to feel turned on. Yet you might in a couple of hours, because you will be releasing some of the tension that you're carrying. But at the outset, if you feel uncomfortable talking about sex, that's good, because it means at least you're being real. Talking about sex is not just about trying to get horny. Talking about sex is about trying to make meaning. If horniness comes as a result of the liberation you feel, awesome. But I can pretty much guarantee if you start talking about sex like it matters, you won't feel horny. Not at the beginning, anyway.
Wow.
I know.
Everything is blowing my mind. And just how you're talking about it, I'm like, I never really thought about it like that before.
There's a lot of things I didn't really think about before. I think I really used to think that I was just broken. And I'm sitting here now thinking about how many people feel that way.
Yeah.
Like, who might feel that way about, their sex lives. Well, that's just how I am. Like, I'm just not cut out to have a meaningful sex life. That's just not who I am. That's not who I'll ever be. And I think you're right. Like, those are the people that I'm like, no, don't give up. Like, there's something there. You just haven't really explored that side of it yet,
Yeah. And that's the piece, I think, where people need to recognize learning to have a relationship with sexuality is a lifetime pursuit. It's not something that you just do in 6 weeks and then it's done and you never have to do it again. It's an ongoing thing, because your sexuality changes as you go through life. So how you experience yourself sexually as a teenager is going to be different than how you experience yourself in your 30s. It's going to be different again than how you experience yourself in your 40s, 50s. And then moving forward into your 60s and 70s, people are going to, your body is going to work differently. Like a 70-year-old is not going to necessarily have sex like a 17-year-old.
Yeah.
And most 70-year-olds that I have discussed this with have said, yeah, and I would never want to have sex like a 17-year-old again, because as you go through life and you accumulate knowledge, sex, again, statistically at least, sex gets better as you get older because you become more experienced. Yet our social conception of sex, that we talk about people at their sexual peak when they're 16, 17, 18, and I'm like, are you kidding? Like,
No way.
17-year-olds have no idea what they're doing. They're just all arms and legs and hormones.
Well, and I was
And
so uncomfortable with my body. And
same. Most
yeah.
17-year-olds are. You haven't been on the planet long enough to know what's going on, first of all. Second of all, you haven't been in an adult body long enough. You've only been in a somewhat adult body for maybe 3 years at that point. How could you possibly know what your body is capable of when you've only been inhabiting an adult body for 3 years? It's like you just, yet our social perception of sex is that it's, when you're young and fit and hot and slim and, all of this, that's when you have the best sex. And I'm like, that is bullshit. That is complete bullshit. And so, sex gets better as you get older because your relationship to yourself enriches. That's what makes it better. Yeah, you're saggy. You're never going to look as tight and firm as you were when you were 17. But your relationship to yourself is going to be so much richer. And again, when we're talking about memorable sex, that's the stuff that makes it memorable, is the degree to which you were there to experience it. At 17, and you're just full of your own juice, and everything is exciting. Anytime the wind picks up, you're like, like the dog chasing the squirrel, like, what's that? And that's how it is to experience sex as a 17-year-old. It's just overwhelming. Whereas as you mature into your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond, you have the time to start reflecting on what matters to you. So coming back to the contents of the book, it is about mismatched libido, and it is about, boosting your libido. But it's also written from the perspective of somebody who has a higher desire for sex than their partner. If you're in a relationship with somebody who wants sex less often than you, that can also feel like a struggle. And so the traditional models of sex therapy said, well, the person with the lower libido is the person who has to do the work to increase it, and that they have to, put in more effort and wear sexy clothes and do this and do that and eat oysters. And, you can do that if you want to. I guess there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not really a guarantee to change anything. Similarly, the person with the higher desire, I don't even get into a discussion about healthy and unhealthy. I don't think those binaries are helpful. Instead, I say to people, if you're the higher desire partner in a relationship and you would like to have sex more frequently with your partner, it is then about helping your partner feel safe enough to describe contexts in which the sex they might be willing to have could happen. Is it because for you as the higher desire partner, is the sex you're offering your partner not really what they want? If you are always just defaulting to 15 minutes of intercourse before sleep at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night, and your partner's like, oh, really? Do we have to? It could be not because they don't want to have sex with you, but because the sex you're offering at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night, it's bad timing. They don't want a 15-minute session. They certainly don't want it late at night when they're tired and they've got to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and they're really not at their best. They've just had a really big meal and all they really want to do is sleep. That's not a libido problem. That's a communication problem. So, this is where I start through the book. I teach people about this, to not say, we don't pathologize people who don't want sex that often, because until we've done a thorough investigation of what's going on for them, we cannot say for sure that there's necessarily a sex problem there. Similarly, somebody who wants to have sex 8 times a day, there's nothing wrong with that necessarily. But if they are using sex as a way to avoid dealing with their emotions, then that's going to come and bite them on the ass eventually. Is that a sex problem, or is there something else going on?
I feel like more times than not, it was always a communication thing with us. And I don't know, I think about how many times that's really going on. I used to, literally, you're saying this, and my husband is a morning person and I am not. And I stay up till midnight and he's asleep by 9:30. So there's always that. Like, he wants to wake me up in the morning when he gets up at 5:30 and have sex. And I'm just angry that he woke me up because I didn't get as much sleep as he did. So we've had a lot of conversations about that and what I prefer versus what he prefers and how we can meet in the middle. And it sounds very unsexy to plan out, but I think in the long run, if you talk about it, then those are the foundation of what you feel comfortable doing. So, I don't think it's unsexy at all.
And that's what I mean about having these conversations. They're not sexy conversations, but they're not supposed to be sexy.
Right. We're not trying to have sex after the conversation.
Exactly. And that's the thing. But if you have the conversations, through the day, or as it is as just a normal part of your life. It means then that when you do get into, some sort of a sex scenario, it's going to be easier to talk about stuff in the moment and be like, I want to move in this direction, or remember we talked about such and such, I want to get on top, or whatever it is. It's going to be so much easier to negotiate that in the moment, because you've done the heavy lifting in previous conversations where the stakes were much lower. Trying to have a heavy conversation like that when you're nude and trying to impress each other is not the best use of your time at that point. That's a lot of pressure to try and be sexy and seductive and have a really complicated conversation. Don't do that to yourself.
Yeah.
Pass it out. You do the heavy conversation at a time when you're just sitting there in your sweatpants, sipping on your, cappuccino, frappuccino, whatever, and just shooting the breeze. That's when you have the weird conversation that's heavy and awkward and embarrassing. That's when you do that. And then when you're nude in bed with the strawberries and the champagne, the conversation doesn't have to be heavy because you've already had the heavy conversation days before.
Yeah, that heavy lifting feels often, it's exhausting, but it always feels good after. Like you're just like, I'm glad we got that out of the way. Like, all right, now I know that you're not turning me down because you don't think I'm, sexy. It has nothing to do with whether you think I'm sexy or not. It's because you're tired and I'm initiating during your prime sleep time. Mm-hmm. That's all that. Yeah. That's it. That's what that was. Okay.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
It feels much better that way. So do you work with couples and individuals?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. It's pretty much a mix of both. I get couples and individuals. And it tends to be sort of short to medium term. I think one of the things that sometimes people think that with this work is that it, again, like traditional psychotherapy, it goes on for years and years and years. This is not like that. This is, short to medium term. I usually say I'll see folks 10 to 20 sessions, and then that's usually plenty.
You're giving them the tools and then they're off.
I give them the tools, but then I give them a ton of homework, and then they come back and I say to them that the real work for you guys is done in between sessions. So it's sort of like if you're working with a personal trainer and you say to the trainer, I want to lose 20 pounds or whatever. And then the trainer says, all right, so, just eat chicken and salad and do these lifts and do this and do that and da-da-da. And, no ice cream, no carbs for 10 weeks. And then you do your one session with the trainer and they're all like, yeah, I'm going to do it. And then the next week comes and you didn't do all the things you said you were going to do, but you did a couple of them. And then, 6 weeks pass and then you say to the trainer, I'm not losing weight. Your program sucks. And then the trainer's like, have you been doing what I told you to do? Have you been eating like this and doing these exercises? I'm like, no, only when I come here and see you once a week. But in between times, I'm just, eating ice cream and chips. And then the trainer's like, well, that's why you're not getting the results that you're looking for, because you're not sticking with the program. So working with me is similar insofar as I give them exercises and reflections and things to practice. But if they don't practice in between sessions and then they just come back to me and be like, give me more exercises, give me more homework. And I'm like, well, have you done the homework that I gave you? No, but I'm just accumulating it for what? To stick in the box that goes under your bed?
Right.
Like, what are you going to This stuff works if you do it. If it just rolls around in your head as a concept and you don't engage with it, nothing is going to change. And so it's for people who want to come and they say that they want to do the work, but they don't actually do the work. Those people find this work, a waste of time and money. And I will say to them straight up, if you don't want to do the work, if you don't want to change, if you don't want to change the way you do things, if you're not willing to be uncomfortable, if you're not willing to be challenged, then don't do this. Stay as you are, then you're fine. But if you're ready to invest yourself energetically, mentally, emotionally, physically. You will find it challenging at times, but you'll find it so incredibly liberating because you will discover a whole new way of relating to yourself that is right under your nose, but you need somebody to help bring it out. And I think because a lot of people have been brought up with this narrative that sex is natural, when we are told over and over and over and over and over
Mm-hmm.
that sex is natural and it only happens when you meet the one, and when you meet the one, then the sex is effortless, and you need to save yourself because, you know, otherwise something really bad will happen. It tricks us into thinking that sex is something we don't have to research, that we don't have to understand, that we don't have to inquire about, in the same way that we are born knowing how to, you know, how to suckle and how to swallow. Like, we don't have to necessarily teach babies how to do that. Most babies come out of the womb knowing how to do that. So that's a natural reflex of that, you know, and swallowing. But that doesn't mean that that baby who knows how to suckle and swallow is going to be a competent chef. Just because they know how to eat food doesn't mean they know how to cook food, right?
Ah.
So similarly with sex, just because the instinct to want to make out is there, and just because the instinct to want to grind or gyrate on somebody else is there, you see little toddlers doing that. They just know how to do that, right? But that doesn't make them competent erotic beings. They're just these little kind of pleasure-seeking missiles that are running around doing whatever. They don't understand anything about anything. Yet, because we don't teach sex from a meaningful place and we just tell people it's natural, when you're with the right person it'll just happen, it gives us the opportunity to then internalize those messages and think, well, if I'm not having good sex, I must be the problem, because sex is natural. And if it's natural, then nobody has a problem with it. I'm the only person who's having a problem with it. So I'm the freak, I'm the weirdo, I'm the bad person. This is how people get so stuck in their shame, because they've drunk the Kool-Aid that says sex is natural. It is not natural, it is learned. The instinct is natural for most people.
Mm-hmm.
But the craft, learning how to be present to yourself, learning how to be present to another person, learning how to sit with the discomfort of talking about sex without defaulting to rushing through it to get it over with in 15 minutes because you can't bear the anxiety that it creates for you. What happens if I don't come? What happens if I lose my erection? What happens if I come too fast? What happens if he thinks I'm too fat? What happens if, I fart in the middle of sex? What happens if, whatever, fill in the blank. For so many of us, we can't wait for it to be over because the anxiety it creates for us is too much to hold.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very difficult place to enjoy pleasure from.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yes, it
I
is.
feel like all of this is so incredibly healing,
Mm.
and also mimics, like in so many ways, mirrors like the healing process mentally in general. Like it's a practice. Nobody knows what the fuck they're doing. We're just like experimenting and finding things that work for us in healing, in sex, in life, in, being taught that it kind of goes back to what you were saying in the very beginning. Like it's the things that we don't talk about that are the
Mm,
things that we need to be hearing.
that's right.
And it's in everything, not just sex. It's a lot of, there's a lot of stuff that we weren't taught when we were younger, that we aren't taught in schools. Emotional intelligence isn't taught in a book, and neither is any of this stuff in the way
Mm,
that we need it to be taught.
Yeah.
yeah. And
Even
how convenient it is that we can tell teenagers, you know, sex is natural. Wait till you find the right person. When you find the right person, you'll just know, and everything will be fabulous. And that is, it, it's such a lie to trick people into being that disconnected from their bodies.
Yeah,
I think it's bordering on abusive.
absolutely.
yeah. So what tips would you have, both of us are moms, and we didn't have those conversations with our parents, how to have those conversations with our children about sex.
Yeah. So I think it's going to be easier to have conversations with your children about sex when you find it easier to have conversations with your friends about sex. So use yourself as the guinea pig on normalizing talking about sex. Allowing the conversation has to be age appropriate, and
Sure.
so working with kids is not my specialty. So let me just preface this with that. What I can say though is that adults who are comfortable talking about adult sex with other adults are generally going to be comfortable talking about sex with little kids. Allowing kids to ask questions at the outset is usually a better way, because if they start asking questions about, in the bathtub when they're 3 years old, why does my dick get hard in the bath? That's a perfect opportunity to say, well, that's called an erection. And that happens when blood goes into your dick. Sometimes it happens because it feels good. Other times it just happens because, you know, something was rubbing on there, or it just happens because, it just happens. It's completely normal. It's nothing to worry about. If they continue to ask questions, so, but why does it feel good? Or why does it, allow kids will only ask questions to the degree that they can process the answers. So you don't have to give them TMI, and you don't have to use yourself as an example of anything. I think often parents will be like, am I supposed to talk about my sex life with my children? No, that's kind of gross. But you teach young people about sex by using their bodies and using their own capacity for what we call it interoception, the capacity to be able to experience the world through the lens of the self. What's happening in your body? What are you noticing? Learning that pleasure is okay is a good thing for young people to learn about, in the same way that they learn about consent. It's not okay for them to touch people without consent. It's not okay for other people to touch them without consent. This is obviously to a 4 or a 5-year-old. If you're talking to a 15-year-old, the conversation's a lot more advanced at that point, because, they are effectively starting to have adult privilege by the time they're 15. But at 3, 4, 5 years of age, they're just learning really basic stuff like identifying an emotion, identifying a sensation, identifying if something makes them feel happy or not happy. So it doesn't have to be complicated for the little ones. And then as the older ones start asking more questions, if they have grown up in an environment where it's safe enough to do that, they will start sharing things with you about, blowjobs and that kind of thing. Not necessarily that they are doing that, but they'll be like, what's the thing with blowjobs? Why do people get into blowjobs? As just a general question,
Yeah.
And you can say, well, people say that they really enjoy it, and people say that, and you don't have to say, well, your father, like, it doesn't have to be. that might be kind of, too much for them. So practicing conversations that just normalize talking about sex is really the best place to start. There are some resources around. Scarletine is a website that has information for young people about sex that's written through a very, very sex positive and medically accurate lens. There's another website called Sex Positive Families that has a lot of resources for people who want to teach kids to talking about sex from lots of different age groups. Scarletine tends to be more for teenagers and young adults, whereas Sex Positive Families is aimed more at, like, from toddlers through to middle school.
Thank you.
So there are resources around specifically for adults and parents who want to start talking about sex with kids at different ages. But the crux of it is always just normalize talking about it, normalize making it a topic that nobody kind of goes, like, as long as they see you engaging with the topic in the same way that you would be engaging, talking about music or recipes or Instagram, that it's just another topic of discussion that will start to give them the permission to notice, oh, it's okay. And it's not one of those things that goes into the box under the bed. It's okay for it to be at the surface and we can talk about it without it being a big deal.
I love that.
Yep.
I want to plug your podcast because we've been like listening to several episodes, but I'm starting to like, as I'm thinking this, for the people out there who listen to our podcast, who are uncomfortable talking about sex, I think a really great place to start is maybe listening to conversations about sex first. And
Definitely.
that's like a really good place to start. So you have a great informative podcast. You bring some really interesting people on and talk to some really cool people about some really interesting things. So let our listeners know how they can find you through your podcast, and also if they are interested in some of your coaching.
Okay. So my podcast is called The Erotic Philosopher, and I tend to do it seasonally, meaning I do it when I feel like it. That's what that means.
Love that.
So I'm just about to finish season 4, which makes it sound very professional, but it's just that I've got other shit to do in the next few months. So I just released one episode this morning, and then I've got another one for next week, and then I'm not going to touch it for a few months. So it's very intermittent, but it's me basically interviewing my colleagues from around the world about stuff that I think really matters. And it's a pretty vast array of different kinds of people and different kinds of topics. But, if you ever wanted to listen to 2 sex therapists talk about their work, that's the podcast that you listen to, because that's effectively what it is. It's just me and my colleagues talking about our work. And for people who don't work in this field, it's endlessly fascinating, I think. So so there's that. And then my website is where I have online classes, and the application form to work with me is there, and the different kinds of tiers of offerings, whether, you can do email coaching, which is just if you have a basic question and you just want like one email exchange, there's that. Then you can book in to do a bunch of sessions, 10, 20 sessions or whatever. And then there's the weekend retreats that I do with couples, which is a much more elite kind of service in that it's very curated and very practical. It's the sort of thing you would, it costs a bit, so it's something you would buy as a wedding gift, that kind of caliber of thing.
Are they all in New York, the retreats?
No, well, not necessarily.
Okay.
Like I don't have the retreats. It's not like I'm having a retreat this weekend.
Okay.
You should come. It's if someone says, "Will you run a retreat for me and my husband?"
Gotcha. Got it.
We are based in Kentucky, or we are in Los Angeles, or we are in Mexico, or we are in Nepal, or wherever. And then either they'll say, "Well, we'll come to New York because that's where I am," or they'll say, "Would you consider coming to wherever we are?" And I'm like, if you pay for it, I'll come.
Absolutely. Get me some KFC.
But just it's a more elite service than the coaching, because the coaching just happens online like this. So,
and you also,
and then there's the pre-recorded online classes, which is sort of probably the most affordable way to work with me. So you still get all the knowledge, but it's in a pre-recorded form. So that's why I do it that way. So I'm sort of hitting lots of different kinds of people, lots of different budgets, because I know not everybody has tens of thousands of dollars to spend on, sexy retreats every weekend. So at least you still get the access to the same kind of information, but you get it measured in a way that meets your budget. And I think that, that really matters. So.
Yeah. One of the things I was looking at last night was the 30 days of vacation sex. Mm-hmm. I started going, you have a lot of information on your website that's accessible to
blogs,
a lot of people. Mm-hmm. So this doesn't just have to be a budget thing. You're very accessible for a lot of different demographics. So I absolutely love that.
Yeah. I mean, that's a value that I really hold is, having access to this information. So a lot of it is on my website for free. And then the courses, it's streamlined in a much more kind of user functioning fashion. Then the email exchange is a bit more in depth again. The coaching is more in depth again, and then the couples retreats are at the top of, I'll fly to you for a weekend and watch you do your thing, and not, I don't mean watch you.
No, I know.
I'll teach
Not
you a
that kind of
series of
therapist.
activities and, help you process it in the moment, like in real time. And so then by the time we're done for the weekend, in theory, you won't need me anymore.
Yeah,
You'll know
right.
how to do it for yourselves, that kind of thing. So, but yeah, I try to do it in such a fashion that people on any budget can still access the work in some way.
I love it.
that.
We need so many more of you, but we can't do that. There's only one Cyndi Darnell. So I love what you're doing. Thank you for sharing with us today and for taking the time to, we're just still, I think, sitting here in shock a little bit. Christine,
Well,
this is the quietest I've ever heard you.
you're not wrong. And I'm even listening to your podcast episode with Dr. Tara. And even that's blowing my mind. So it's all just blowing my mind right now.
We're going to get you out of your comfort zone. We're going to get everybody out of their comfort zone. So thank you again. And maybe one day we'll be back on here talking about your next time using psychedelics.
Possibly. It's on my list of things to do. A few of my friends here in New York are part of the psychedelic therapist movement that's really kicking off here in New York. And that's reawakened my interest in it again. It's so funny, like now that I feel like this kind of grand old dame that I've been around the block, like I said, a million times, that I can almost see these trends sort of coming back into fashion again. So, but it'll be nice to go and experiment with psychedelics again from a totally different headspace for me. And and that's the thing about, like, with sex, just even though I took psychedelics 25 years ago, I haven't taken them now in the age that I am now. It's going to be a whole new world. I'm not that person I was like half my lifetime ago. So,
yeah. And I do think the way that my husband and I have used them, you were talking about, I know I'm trying to like go on a tangent here and I'm not trying to, but it's when we do MDMA together, the noise disappears. So we are able to stare into each other's eyes for, a very long period of time and not feel uncomfortable or like, oh my God, he's looking at me. Like, it's very, very intimate and connecting on a completely different level, but not just when we're on it. It kind of carries out throughout, like when we're done with the MDMA, like that still exists in our relationship, which I think is very beautiful. So I don't know. I see you working with that someday too. I'm just putting that out there into the universe.
Yeah.
Very useful tool. All right. So we'll put all your links in our bio for our listeners to check you out and to give you a follow on Instagram. And thank you all for listening and getting uncomfortable with us today. Thank you, Cyndi, so much.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure.
All right. Bye.
Bye.